let me tell you what I find more disturbing, that there are children's doctors and hospitals in this country, as well as parents, if I could be really blunt, that think sending their minor children into a buzzsaw of transgender surgery or chemical castration makes sense. It makes no sense, of course. It's abusive, as a matter of fact. Would you give, and very simply the metric is, would you give your child a pint of whiskey? If I told you, and there were a few doctors that had a consensus that, letting your child knock back a pint of whiskey is medicinal, of course you wouldn't. It's an absurd premise, but somehow it's not absurd to butcher a child to change their gender, as if you even could. Here to discuss this, Catherine Green Robertson. She's chief counsel in the Office of the Attorney General in Alabama. And the reason we're speaking with Catherine specifically today is because attorneys general all over the country are now going to be able to weigh in on this and protect children in their respective states because of this ruling. So, Ms. Robertson, thank you so much for your time this morning. Hello.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Good to be with you.
First of all, this was a decision upholding states' rights, which I love. But the states protecting their children specifically is the way I read this. You?
That's right. I mean, right now we've got 26 states across our country that have laws like this. Alabama was one of the early states to adopt a law like this to prohibit this type of practice on minors. We've been litigating our case for several years. It was recently dismissed by the plaintiffs. We had the Biden DOJ come in against us. And so, yes, it's a big victory for states to maintain the right to protect public health and safety, which was, one of the original ideas given to the states by our founders.
This is a sincere question, not a stupid question. I mean this. What would happen in your state? What would you do to an adult or adults who hosted a party of teenagers and let them all get drunk at the house? What happens in Alabama? Do you guys prosecute that?
Well, there'd be some liability for that, for providing alcohol to minors, for sure.
Why is taking your minor child to have their genitals cut off different than that?
Well, it's not. However, as you know, the medical organizations that have been involved in this issue have spent thousands of pages of briefs and lawsuits in court to make the case that this is safe and that it's honestly the compassionate thing to do. Our state lost early in this case because of the amount of so-called medical evidence that was in favor of these practices, and we had to fight back on that. In fact, it was Alabama's discovery in our case that Justice Thomas relied on in his concurrence to point out that the research does not support this, that it's not safe. And even though that seems like common sense, it really bucks the trend that the medical community has been backing on this issue. And so we said yesterday, this is a ruling that favors the rule of law, but also common sense. And I think that it's going to discredit many of the medical organizations who have been pushing this.
Catherine Green Robertson is chief counsel in the Office of the Attorney General of Alabama, and we're talking about this huge ruling, 6-3. The three, of course, were the predictable wing of the court on the left. Two of whom, it was pointed out, I thought interestingly, are not parents. Two of the three who said this was fine don't have children at all. Do you think that matters? And maybe this is too personal a question. Maybe I shouldn't ask it, but I'm gonna. And you can tell me to just stand down if you don't like it, counsel. Do you have children, Ms. Robertson, and do you think that matters in talking about this?
Well, I think it overlooks the fact that it's not compassionate for parents to be any more misled than for their minor children. And so if you're not giving parents the honest truth about the dangers of these types of medicines and treatments, then the parents aren't in any better position than the minor child to make the decision. And so this has been an argument. I was there at the Supreme Court the day this case was argued. The other side presented a very emotional appeal for sympathy and compassion towards the people wanting these treatments. But I actually think it's more compassionate to both the parents and the child to know the truth about the life-altering impacts of these. And so I find it, pretty typical of the far left to not see it that way, to just toe the line in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's not safe, and that there are so many people out there that have had regrets about these treatments that they've done early in their lives, and then they grow up and realize what a huge mistake they've made. I don't think that is a service to parents or their children.
The argument in defense of this Ms. Robertson, is what was it? The 14th Amendment that was invoked here in defense of this?
Yeah, the argument is that this is a sex-based discrimination, a sex-based classification, because the law is applied against transgender children. That is not true. It was an age restriction. And so we saw these same arguments made in Alabama. The 11th Circuit rejected them. We felt very confident that the Supreme Court would as well. But of course, the liberal justices want transgenderism to be treated as a suspect class, and for this all to be about that identifying quality. This is an age thing. We are not trying to weigh in on adults making these types of decisions. And the court, it was I think a pretty easy decision for the conservative justices here.
Yeah, to make children with, in my view, this is my words, not yours, to make children who have a mental condition, I believe this is a mental illness, to create a class of people, minor people with mental conditions, and call them a class of people that deserve constitutional protection, that's about as contorted as it gets, because then you can say minor children that have any fool thought in their head are a protected class of people and thus can do whatever they want. Why do we have guardrails on anything young people do then?
Right. And look, we have age restrictions all across our laws for a variety of reasons, for voting, for driving, for alcohol consumption, as you mentioned. Same analysis here. It's what is safe for an adult, or what an adult may need the freedom to do or want the freedom to do does not mean that a minor child should have it, especially in the context of something like this that is not backed by evidence, not backed by science, and has a life-altering impact. And so, again, this is a policy debate that the states have been grappling with. Most states have come down clearly on the side of Alabama, which is we are not going to allow this practice to go on. What will be interesting is with this decision behind us, and I think Justice Thomas's concurrence is so important because he talks about the fact that the science has really been a sham. It's going to be interesting to see what blue and purple states do with that information, because our side has really had to fight stacks and stacks of briefs filed by organizations that sound professional, that sound like experts, all these associations, including WPATH, which has been a target of ours. And now they've got to realize that when they have this debate, the science is objectively not on their side. At best, it's neutral, if not on our side. And so how will states respond to that? Will blue states continue to use this rhetoric to pass laws to protect this? Or are they going to realize that it needs to be prohibited?
Yeah, you know how unscientific this is, and how I know it is because hospital groups in blue states, particularly in Philadelphia, are backing away from this because the federal government, led by Trump, is saying you're not going to get any money to do this stuff if you don't knock it off. That money flow from the feds to these hospitals is so important to them, they've decided to shelve this on their own. Ms. Robertson, thank you very, very much for your time and your fight on this. Protecting our children is critically important. I'm glad to have you. Thanks so much.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.